There is nothing new under the crimson moon, and I find that quite beautiful. Repetition is beautiful. Well, as true a repetition which in this world can be, is beautiful. What many consider the spurn of existence, that unseemly oddity and randomness it possesses, that inherent trait of the worldly will, which is mother to us all, and that trifold equivalence law which it so necessarily is. It's all beautiful. It makes repetition not tedium but monotony. The same is never quite so. It's of the meaninglessness of meaning, the meaning of meaninglessness. What was it you wanted to talk about? Oh, right, phonology. Phonology is the study of speech sounds, of phones. Any given language has two types of phones, phonemes and allophones. Phonemes are the individual sounds of any given language, while allophones are variants of said phonemes. The most common way to write out phones is the IPA, and no, not the beer, but the International Phonetic Alphabet. Other phonetic alphabets also exist, but the International Phonetic Alphabet is the most common one worldwide, and it is the one I will be using. We'll return to it later, but the basics you need to know is that brackets mark a more accurate pronunciation of a word, and slashes mark an approximate pronunciation, and is usually preferred when referencing the pronunciation of one given language in the context anyhow. To put it concisely, English R isn't what is written as R in the IPA, but it is the only rhotic, i.e. R-like, sound in English, so it's close enough to be understood in the context and makes phonetic spelling less laborious. Anyhow, a sound is only classified as a phoneme if there is an instance in the given language where confusing the sound for another would change the meaning of the word. Think bat and pat in English. Allophones naturally then are the opposite of this, distinct phones which can be used rather interchangeably in all instances without the meaning changing, even if they usually appear only in certain phonic context. Consider the English words spat and pat, for example. The P sound there is actually different in both instances. In the former, spat, it appears in its basic form, while in the latter, pat, it is aspirated, meaning more air is released as it is said, and thus it is an allophone. In addition to the nature of appearing as either phonemes or allophones in languages, phones can also be categorized based on how they are said in two main categories, vowels and consonants. The distinction between consonants and vowels is in stricture of the vocal tract. Vowels are without it, consonants are with it. As with all good rules, though, there is an exception, which is the sound H, which is a consonant without any vocal tract stricture. I imagine this exception is usually addressed with more in-depth explanations of how vowels are pronounced, but let's not get into that now. So vowels. Since vowels don't have a stricture of the vocal tract, but are mere continuous uninterrupted vocal noise passing through the mouth, the main thing separating them from one another is the positioning of the tongue in the mouth. This range of tongue positions in the mouth is called vowel space, and it is usually visualized thusly, but more realistically should be like this. Let's stick with the former. Vowel space is an area defined by height ranging from open to mid to close, and by depth ranging from back to center to front. The latter is quite intuitive. Back vowels like O are pronounced further back in the mouth, closer to the throat, than front vowels like E, which in turn are pronounced closer to the front of the mouth, closer to the lips. The height axis is less intuitive, but open vowels like R are pronounced with the tongue lower in the mouth, closer to the lower jaw, and close vowels like E are pronounced higher in the mouth, closer to the roof of the mouth. The close-open naming comes from your mouth being more closed or open when pronouncing the vowels. In addition, vowels are also defined by a rounding of the lips. With unrounded vowels like E or R, your lips are, depending on the vowel, quite apart, but with rounded vowels like U or O, your lips are more puckered up. Now English quite lacks a distinction between unrounded and rounded vowels, so it's harder to demonstrate. But verily rounded and unrounded vowels can occupy the same vowel space, so that only the rounding is the distinction between phonemes. In Finnish, for example, the vowels I and U, or E and Ö, are totally distinct, though occupying the same vowel space. Vowels can also be defined by nasalization. Now nasal versus oral vowels don't occupy precisely the same space, since the required lowering of the soft palate on the roof of the mouth to produce nasal vowels alters the space slightly, but tongue positions can be similar. To clarify, nasal vowels are vowels where air escapes from both the oral and nasal cavity when pronounced, and oral vowels are vowels where air escapes only the former. English doesn't really distinguish between nasal and oral vowels, but nasal vowels can sometimes appear as allophones, such as with some dialects in words like hand. Languages like French, however, do distinguish nasal vowels from oral vowels, such as with the words pat and tant. Yet another thing which can define vowels is diphthongization or length. Vowel length determines, as its name implies, for how long a vowel is said, and yes, many languages do distinguish between short a and long a, such as for example Finnish. There are 5 main types of vowel lengths, but very few languages, if any, actually distinguish between more than 2. A diphthong or a triphthong is a vowel sound, which moves around in vowel space as it is being said. For that to work, diphthongs are most often equally long as long vowels. Now, as you can probably figure, a diphthong is a sound which moves from one vowel to another, and a triphthong is a vowel which moves from one vowel to another to yet another. English has morphemic diphthongs and certain accents have allophonic triphthongs. Words such as tie feature a diphthong I, while words such as ire can feature triphthongs. Languages such as Livi-Karelian arguably feature morphemic triphthongs, such as in the word suau. That's all about vowels, the basics anyhow. Consonants get trickier. The most common type of consonant is a pulmonic consonant, which is produced with air pressure from the lungs. But there are also such types of consonants as ejective, implosive, and click consonants. Consonants are defined by place of articulation and manner of articulation. Not all combinations of manner and place are humanly possible to say, and many possible combinations don't appear at all in any natural language in the world. There are 4 basic locations in the mouth where consonants are produced, those being from the front to the back: the labial, the coronal, the dorsal, and the laryngeal regions. More commonly, those are separated further into labial, dental, alveolar, postalveolar, retroflex, palatal, velar, uvular, pharyngeal, and glottal places. But even more categorizations exist, such as bilabial, labiodental, linguolabial, interdental, prevelar, and so on. The gist is get familiar with the regions of the mouth, like the labia, the dental ridge, the alveolar ridge, the velum, the hard palate, the uvula, the pharynx, and the glottis. Consonants are also made in a variety of different manners. There are 5 basic types of these, where a consonant can thus be, for example, a nasal, where airflow is directed also through the nose. Think, for example, ma. A plosive, where airflow is interrupted and released. Think pa. A fricative, where airflow is forced through a narrow channel. Think fa. An approximant, where airflow is forced through a less narrow channel. Think ya. Or a trill, where the tongue is quickly flapped onto a place of pronunciation. Think the rolling ra. But of course it gets more complicated than that. For starters, if one pronounces a trill like ra with only one tap, ara, one pronounces what is called a tap. Alternatively, one can combine a plosive and a fricative sound from the same place and form an affricate, such as English cha. Furthermore, fricatives, affricates, approximants, and taps can most be pronounced either medially, with airflow flowing through the center of the mouth, or laterally, with airflow being redirected to circle the tongue from the sides. English has one lateral sound, and that is the alveolar lateral approximant la. Lateral fricatives and affricates for their part can be found in languages like Nahuatl, or how they say it, Nahuatl, featuring an alveolar lateral affricate. It doesn't end there though with the basics of pulmonic consonants. Medial fricatives and affricates can also be distinguished on the grounds of sibilance. A sibilant fricative is simply a fricative with more pitch and higher amplitude than a non-sibilant fricative. English features both and almost makes a distinction between them. The word moth, for example, features for many speakers the dento-alveolar non-sibilant fricative tha, while the word moss features the alveolar sibilant fricative sa, not far off. And if you thought this made for a ridiculous amount of pulmonic consonants already, there are almost twice as many, since I've yet to mention voicing. Nearly all pulmonic consonants, with the exception of the glottal stop, can be said either as a voiceless or voiced variant of the place and manner they occupy. Voicing is the phenomenon of vibrating your vocal cords as you make a sound. English distinguishes heavily between voiced and voiceless consonants with words such as pit and bit. Both P and B are bilabial plosives, but the former is voiceless and the latter is voiced. Consonants can have a myriad different modifications to the way they are pronounced. The most common modifications are aspiration, where a puff of air is released before or after the consonant; labialization, where the lips are rounded slightly, sounding kind of like a wa; palatalization, where the soft palate is more involved, that is effectively a slight "ya" is added, and velarization, where the hard palate is more involved, effectively adding a "ra". There are many others, of course, such as nasal or lateral release, creaky or breathy voice, and more. Oh, and almost forgot, there are such things as long consonants, or rather geminates. They are rather self-explanatory, just pronounce the consonant for a longer while. Languages such as Finnish distinguish between short consonants and geminate consonants, with words like tapa and tappa having radically different meanings. Anyhow, those are pretty much the pulmonic consonants, but there are 3 other types of consonants left. These are rather rare, as studies have concluded that 73% of all languages in the world use only pulmonic consonants. Regardless, let's glance at the ejective, implosive and click consonants. Ejective and implosive consonants are quite similar, as they both revolve around glottalic airstream, instead of one born purely of air pressure from the lungs. Ejectives are consonants, usually voiceless, and always either plosives, fricatives or affricates, which are pronounced with aggressive glottalic airstream, that is purely outwards airflow. Examples including "va" and "ba". Implosives, for their part, are plosives with ingressive then egressive glottalic airstream. That is, they are pronounced mostly with airflow flowing to the glottis rather than the other way around, as it was with the ejectives. Examples include "ba" and "da". Click consonants are the most interesting, in my opinion, of the pulmonic consonants, and you've probably heard of them before. They are, as their name suggests, clicking sounds. English speakers sort of use them, just not phonemically or really even allophonically, but in onomatopoetic expressions such as click consonants appear almost exclusively in southern and eastern Africa, and every language which has them has dozens, if not well over 100, but never just one or a couple. Unlike the other types of consonants, they don't really have airflow to them, but are pronounced by forming an air pocket between the place of pronunciation and the tongue. With them not having airflow, there aren't any strictly voiced click, but they can appear as diphones with voiced pulmonic consonants. Now that's all well and good, and the basics of what puzzle pieces are used in the study of phonology, but there's actually more to phonology than that, as I slightly prefaced earlier with the allophones and vowel diphthongs and whatnot. Phonology also includes the study of how spoken sounds fit into words and into syllables. Syllables are the basic units which make up spoken words. Syllables can be explained in many different ways, but I'll go with the following. Syllables consist of 3 parts, a beginning, a middle, and an end, or rather, an onset, a nucleus, and a coda. The only necessary part of any syllable is the nucleus, which is most often some sort of vowel. Can either be short or long, a monodiphth or triphthong, or it can be nasalized. A nucleus can also be a consonant, which is called a syllabic consonant. English doesn't use many syllabic consonants, but it can happen in certain words like bottle. The onset precedes the nucleus and consists exclusively of a consonant or of consonants. Should an onset include many consonants, it is called a consonant cluster. An example of this is the English word cluster, which features the sounds ka and la in the onset. The coda in turn follows the nucleus and also consists exclusively of a consonant or of a consonant cluster. If a syllable should have no coda, it is called an open syllable, and if it should have a coda, it is called a closed syllable. All languages limit the form their syllables can take, some more than others. Some languages, such as Hawaiian, only allow syllables to have a singular optional onset consonant and a singular vowel, with no possibilities for a coda. Other languages have as many as 8 onset consonants, like Georgian, or 5 coda consonants, like English. Additionally, many languages don't allow for certain consonants in initial or final positions, like English, which doesn't allow nga in the onset position. For the purpose of explaining these limitations, phonologists have something of a standardized set of symbols to describe different types of phones. Most generally, they are simply the capitalized variant of the first letter of what they represent. The first letter in English, that is, and in parentheses if optional. So, for example, C means consonant, N means nasal consonant, and V means vowel. Specific subsets may be indicated with other letters, specific IPA symbols, or with numbers, usually in subscript. Additionally, a hashtag usually means a word final coda. Syllables or other words can also be modified by vocal tones, such as in Chinese. Now, by rights, I could have included tone in the vowel section of this explanation, but it works as well here, I think. Considering in some languages the tonal change of a whole word, not just a syllable, can change its meaning. There are 5 different levels of tones overall, from extra high to mid to extra low. But no natural language uses them all, with the most level tones being in the Wobe language of the Ivory Coast, it having 4 distinct level tones. Tones are not only limited to level tones though, but they can also rise or fall then rise, or rise then fall. Theoretically tones could rise or fall even more times, but that doesn't realistically happen. As yet a brief note, syllables and words are can have stress. Syllabic stress is marked by vowel length, loudness, tone, emphasis, or any combination of those, depending on the language. Words can have both primary and secondary stress. In some languages, such as in Spanish, stress has phonetic meaning, and different words stressed differently can mean different things, while in others stress doesn't mean anything other than making you sound funny if you get it wrong. Some languages have standardized stress patterns, such as Finnish, where the primary stress always falls on the first syllable. And I suppose that's really all you need to know about the basics of phonology. Simple, isn't it?